Welcome back, everyone. I'm really honored to welcome Kúkpi Chief Rosanne Casimir. Kúkpi Chief Casimir is a strong, confident Secwepemc woman leading by example as the 14th elective to Kamloops Secwepemc. She is honored to be working as the community's political advocate and to be building on the previous leadership's initiative. She looks forward to what the future holds for Tk'emlúps as Chief and Council and continue to support their membership and develop pride as Tk'emlúps exercise their title and rights, and build economic security for future generations. As Chief, Rosanne is committed to building a strong and supportive Chief and Council that develops respectful and professional relationships with all internal and external parties. The goal for all Chief and Council is a community that is safer and healthier for future generations. Chief Casimir is a political advocate, wife, mother, godmother, grandmother, and a proud owner of a Jack Russell. She is joining us today to speak to intergenerational trauma and the resilience of Indigenous communities despite residential schools, and we're really honored to have her with us today. We'll have a little time at the end for questions and invite you to share any questions in the Q&A section, and that is located beside the chat section on the right side of this video. So I'm just going to pass it over to Chief Casimir. Hi, everyone. We just lost Chief Casimir briefly, so we're going to work on bringing her back. So if we could just take a pause for a moment, if people want to get a glass of water or a cup of tea, that would be great. Hi, Rosanne, are you there?
I am here. Sorry about that. There was a box that came up that's blocked off the whole screen, and it's had an option of got it or leave. And I thought I hit got it and I left and had to reboot. So again, sorry for the inconvenience.
No worries. Welcome back. Nice to see you.
Thank you. All right, so I will start my presentation. So Kúkpi7 everyone, hello. My name is Rosanne Casimir of Kúkpi, Chief of the Kamloops Secwepemc, and just newly re-elected for my second term. And I'm truly honored to be here joining all of you today. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you and sharing with you from the direct ancestral lands of the Kamloops Secwepemc. And we are on the unceded traditional territory within Secwepemc. And so I will be, sharing a little bit about who I am and what I'm doing, and, some additional information as well as to what's been happening within our community and, what some of those steps are looking like moving forward. So I was invited here today after working with the Ending Violence BC, with the BC Lions, to promote the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And the Kamloops Secwepemc, we really appreciated everyone's efforts and awareness to Orange Shirt Day as well. Residential school survivors and the intergenerational survivors as well, and bringing truth and support and honor to that National Day as well. I also want to acknowledge the great work that the Ending Violence BC does with the training, prevention, and supporting those that need that help. Ending violence for us is always a topic that is something that hits home. It hits directly home when it comes to us as First Nations, and facing so many different levels of violence within our communities as well as personally, and all different shapes and all different forms. We know that some of the statistics just for consideration, include, that Indigenous women and girls are 5 times more likely to experience violence than any other population in Canada. And that violence does tend to, result in more serious harm. Indigenous women make up to 16% of all female homicide victims as well, some of the statistics, and that 11% of the missing women, even though Indigenous people make up 43% or 4.3% of the population of Canada. We know that, as an Indigenous woman and Indigenous women are 3 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to be victims of violence. Looking at intimate partner violence as a major problem facing Aboriginal women. And, speaking as a woman, I know firsthand personal experience, what it is like to be in an unhealthy relationship and to be, part of, the traumas that you experience individually and how it impacts the family. And, knowing that, there's that serious soul searching and being able to, rise above and to move forward to more healthier relationships. Violence against Indigenous women and girls is, also systemic, and it's a national crisis that requires urgent, informed, and collaborative steps. We know that the current public data on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, oversimplifies and underrepresents the scale of the issues. Yet still, it demonstrates a complex and pervasive pattern of violence against Indigenous women and girls who are often targeted because of gender and Indigenous identity. Another form of violence against Indigenous people included the residential school system, which was designed to take the Indian out of the child. As most everyone here, knows now that just this past May in 2021, unmarked graves of children were identified here at the former Indian Residential School here on our IR number 1. And, after years of silence and disbelief, the Kamloops Indian Residential School survivors' firsthand knowledge about the deaths of children in residential school systems, have been confirmed through the ground penetrating radar system that was brought in. So we know that from the oral tellings that now that it's coming to fruition with the new technology and science that's able to, support that. These missing children in the Kamloops Secwepemc caretaking, they have experienced unthinkable circumstances leading to their deaths, and whose remains are placed in unmarked graves, even to this date right now. Here at TTS, we know that survivors of the Kamloops Indian Residential School, appreciate seeing all Canadians acknowledging those truths, and that we know and have spoken for such a long time. For so many, it's like it's the first time they're hearing it and learning about it and wanting to learn about it and be educated. So one comment that I have heard over and over, since the news broke out, is they're actually listening to me. They want to know. So many of our people are expressing, that and sharing that for the first time, that people want to know their stories. They want to know and learn more about them, and that they're also being looked at quite differently. So, for me and for all of us, this feels like for many that this is the first time in Canadian history that non-Indigenous people are really listening and understanding what residential school was actually all about and how it has impacted, our communities. And so, what happened at residential schools was something that has always been known in our community. And now education has started to spread. And, here it's about sharing that information, sharing those truths, and, looking at continuing to move that path forward. We're still mapping a way forward to bring peace, to the missing children and their families and, their communities. Here at the Kamloops Secwepemc, we had anywhere up to 500 students at any given time. And those students were taken from their homes, anywhere from here, our direct community, but other communities throughout Secwepemc, as well as, other areas within the province of BC, and as far away as in the Washington border of the United States, as well as the Yukon and over into Alberta. So, I know for all of us, it's time that we acknowledge and embrace our real collective history and recognizing those mistakes, that is huge. And, how we could be looking at the past and learning from the past and moving forward. And that, we know that we all need to be, making those steps forward and being a part of that change. And, we want everyone to join us in being that change. So, just wanting to link, some of this as well, just wanted to, share that, this issue is not just at the Kamloops Secwepemc issue. Since the discovery here at the Kamloops Secwepemc, there's been similar efforts from First Nations right across Canada to carry out and search for former residential school sites and utilize the GPR work and the science to be able to help guide and support their oral truths from their communities as well. So this is just the start of the horrifying story and about unmarked grave sites at former residential schools. And, we know that there's still a lot more work that is taking place. And we know that according to the Truth and Reconciliation, there have been, over 150,000 First Nations children taken from their families and sent to residential school. And so, knowing, even then, and imagining the trauma, the physical, the emotional, trauma that was impacted just from the taking of the children from their homes has been very impactful. And, knowing that to their demise and to their death, there's still so many unanswered questions that we're still seeking. And, we know that there's several key pieces to the story of the residential school. And, I'm going to be addressing a number of them. And, for us, when you look at one, intergenerational trauma. When First Nations talk about residential schools, you often hear the phrase intergenerational trauma. And I want to take the time to explain, exactly what that is and what it looks like for our community. So intergenerational trauma affects descendants who didn't directly experience the traumatic events that their family members went through. It is a trauma that is passed down through the generations. It's effects that go beyond individual psychology. It also acts as a family and social and cultural level as well. In addition to psychological effects, it also impacts neurobiology, and it appears to have genetic effects as well. So an example of intergenerational effects would be that those that attended residential school were never parented or allowed to show their emotions when they had kids. They did not have any parenting skills from how that they were raised, and parenting skills is something that had to be learned. There are also long-term repercussions from not being able or allowed to show your emotions. There are two examples of many impacts from residential school. Other impacts include a disconnect from your family, attempted annihilation of culture, language, and of course, the values that go with them. And often the basic impacts from residential school were also exacerbated by the sexual and the physical and the emotional abuse. Most people do not and do what they know. It takes an understanding of the cycle and to be able to break that cycle as well. The residential school experience had a direct impact on survivors, and it has spilled over to the descendants. There are issues that are pertaining to the identity, the culture, and the parenting that have created so many conflicts and unresolved anger for many of the survivors. Another area is colonialism. When we look at colonialism, it has evolved a set of processes, mechanisms and structures designed to dispossess First Nations of their self-determination, within their territories. So this involved legislation, policy, and systems that undermine First Nations governance and justice systems and forcibly interrupted Indigenous social and familial fabric. This has also involved systemically disempowering individuals from decision-making about their lives, including those through various means such as residential schools, Indian hospitals, child welfare, and of course the criminal justice system. And that, also looking at the overrepresentation. So looking at legislation, policy, and institutions, they're all founded upon these realities of colonialism and the results of which are seen in available data about Indigenous peoples and the justice system. So when we look at also the Truth and Reconciliation, I just wanted to give a little background about the Truth and Reconciliation for those that may not be intimately, familiar with it and the work. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was created through a legal settlement between residential school survivors, the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit representatives, and the parties responsible for creation and operation of residential schools. Included was the federal government and the church bodies. The Truth and Reconciliation's mandate was to inform all Canadians about what happened in residential schools. The Truth and Reconciliation also documented the truth about, from survivors, their families, their communities, and anyone who personally was affected by the residential school experience. This included First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and former residential school students and their families and communities, the churches, and of course, the former school employees and government officials and other Canadians as well who provided testimonies. The Truth and Reconciliation concluded its mandate in 2015 and transferred its records to the safekeeping of the National Centre of Truth and Reconciliation. The TRC issued 94 calls to action and 10 principles for truth and reconciliation. So those TRC issues many calls to action regarding the violence against our people, including the continued removal of our children and families and communities' attempts at obliteration of our customs, practices, and languages, and the gaps in the health funding and health outcomes, and the equity in the legal systems, and the missing children, and the burial information. And those are just to name a few. Both the government and the church need to commit to implementing the calls to action with First Nations in full partnership to achieve reconciliation. We know that it's going to probably take years before we get there. But today, now is about sharing those truths and, participating in that path forward. If you haven't had the opportunity to review the calls to action, I would also encourage you to do so. When we look at resilience, the term resiliency is commonly talked about when describing our communities. And what does healing and resiliency mean for us? Well, first it means education as a larger public about what the residential school really was about and its true legacy. Healing means the steps that we must all take moving forward to heal those intergenerational gaps. We know that such healing steps could include implementing the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. We also know that working with survivors and intergenerational survivors to help identify the impacts that it had on them, and working to reestablish pride in our culture, our language, and identity as First Nations peoples. One of the key elements of healing is working also with the Catholic Church in order to find answers about what happened, with our children, and of course, also obtaining the undoctored documents as well. We also want the Catholic Church and its various entities to cooperate and disclose all the relevant records and information that they may have. All other church entities in Canada that administered residential school have disclosed our records. So we know that we're still working with the Catholic Church to do the same. It's time, we need to do that. We need to have answers and move forward. So far to date, we know that when it just comes to the records, that the Catholic Church has not met its legal and financial obligations, with respect to providing reparations or compensation to residential school survivors. So I know that that has been a major obstacle to reconciliation. So for us at the Kamloops Secwepemc, we've engaged with our local diocese And we have encouraged them to take meaningful measures to advance our healing journey. And so we have met on several occasions and several times to do exactly that, and what that could mean meaningfully on a local level within our community, to a broader community level, and even as a nation, and also Canadian, a national level as well. And we also know that the world is, looking to what that path could look like moving forward. First Nation survivors and their family members have been adamant that, they would like the Pope to travel to Canada, to make a meaningful formal apology, on behalf of the Catholic Church for the impacts on residential schools. I know that, recently in the last couple of months, we've seen in the media that the CCB, as well as the bishops of Canada, have reached out and working at collaborating and, apologizing on behalf of the local diocese. And also in the media, we've seen where the Holy See himself, the Pope, has also publicly stated that he is going to be, willing and looking at a visit to Canada. So, we do see that as some meaningful steps and some good conversation moving forward. I also, want to share that, most recently that as part of the delegation that the Pope has shared, that there's going to be a delegation of 12, and it is now 13, that I will be one of the delegates who will be going to Rome on behalf of British Columbia. And, being able to share with him, what reconciliation could be, what that path forward could be, sharing with them the truth from our survivors and carrying those voices over there. And also publicly noting that I did put out to the public that I was going to be inviting the Pope himself to come to our arbor here in Kamloops, Secwepemc. I will be, going there with a more formalized invitation as well. And on behalf of the Kamloops, be hand delivering that invitation for him to be here. And, to hear from our survivors, see the residential school, and see how the unmarked graves has impacted our community and has changed this path, in history, and how we do need to move towards those steps of reconciliation. I know that there are so many lessons to be learned about, uncovering of the children in the unmarked grave sites of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. And we know that since the discovery, elders have said that children are finally ready to be found. The world is ready to listen. So now is the time that these children, can be rediscovered and walking that path and utilizing the science to help us, with those confirmations. And we know that, with this comes a wider discussion about racism against Indigenous peoples that still is prevalent throughout our judicial and our health and our education systems in BC. We also can identify that within our own communities and our local municipalities as well. We know that when we talk about racism and discrimination, it is at every level. So we all have a role and a part, to recreate and reset those steps. And there's been so many cases in the media, about racism. I know that Maxwell Johnson and his granddaughter, Tori Ann, who were handcuffed while trying to open up a bank account at the Bank of Montreal. The way that Joyce Eschwitchen was treated as she laid dying in the hospital, to the daily experience of our people being followed around, in the stores. So there's so many different examples that are out there. And this topic about racism and violence against, women and Indigenous, sparks the importance and significance of having those ongoing discussions and, making that at the forefront so that we can truly work towards that path of, changing that for our future generations. Reconstruction and reconciliation, they go hand in hand, and it's restructuring of those old ideologies, with reconciliation, what that path is moving forward. And we must support each other, in how that looks. And reconciliation, it's also it's a multi-generational journey that we all have to be on. When we look at our parents, we look at ourselves, we look at our children and our grandchildren, and how significant and how important that is to reset and rechange that path moving forward. It's not only for us as Indigenous, but it's for all people. All of us, need to be looking at each other. Like, when we look at every child matters, we know that every single one of us is somebody's child. So truly, that every child matters is something that we should be acknowledging from everybody. It is through, these conversations that started to happen through the unveiling of the unmarked graves, that these real steps towards healing have occurred. And it's only the beginning. So we need to work together so that everyone, First Nations and non-First Nations, that we acknowledge those truths and that we come to terms with these truths so that we can truly collectively heal. There is hope. We know that, our voices, are being heard, and that the wider Canadian public, is finally understanding the impacts of those truths. And, this information that has been shared has truly traumatically impacted them as well. We've seen that here within our community. We have such an outpour of support and the importance of, healing together collectively, as those are real hard truths that have been acknowledged. So we need to ensure that justice and accountability happens in the long term, which means keeping pressure, at every single level, whether it's the politicians, whether it's the churches, to continue doing the right thing. It also means that we need to continue to talk about these issues, in sessions like this, within our own communities, with local municipalities, within our own First Nation communities, First Nation communities and non-Indigenous communities, and looking at all the different organizations that we could be, sharing and educating. Reconciliations starts with truth telling, and our lost children are helping to tell that story so that healing can begin. Regardless of your background, we want to make the world a better place for our children and give them the hope and the assurance that every child does matter, just like I had stated before. And we all need to do this to continue to walk in solidarity together, and that together that we can achieve that. We at the Kamloops Tk'emlúps, we truly extend our deep appreciation, for all those who stood in solidarity with us and all other First Nations across Canada dealing with unmarked graves. We have a long path to go, and we know that we can't do it alone, and that this is something that we all need to do to change the future for our children and make it a better place for them, and working with the different educational institutions as well. So thank you very much. I say Kúkpi7 on behalf of all of us here at the Kamloops Tk'emlúps, in walking with, mourning with, grieving with, but also sharing in with the truths and what that path forward could look like. Kúkpi7.
Thanks so much, Kúkpi7 Casimir. I appreciate everything you've shared. There's lots to think about. Especially, I liked what you said about multi-generational journey. I think it is a journey, and I think for many of us who are non-Indigenous, thinking of all the ways we can support the Indigenous communities with the work that they're doing, and also what we can do in our own ways to support change, in all of our communities. I just wanted to check in if there was any questions. If anyone has any questions for Kúkpi7 Casimir, please post them in the question and answer section, which is to the right of your screen on the chat. And we'll just pause a moment to see if any questions come in. Just waiting for any questions. Yeah, if you have any comments or questions for Kúkpi7 Casimir, it would be great to ask them now. there's a lot, I think, in her presentation. I think just the importance, I think, for many of us, if you haven't read the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation report, I think that's such a meaningful report for everyone to read and kind of really understand what that means, because it kind of crosses all our different sectors of society, that report, and all the things we can do in all the different areas that we're working in. And it doesn't look like there's any questions, Chief Casimir. So I just want to know if there was any final thoughts you wanted to add before we kind of go for a break.
No, just the final thoughts are, thank you for having me here. Thank you for, giving me some time to be able to share, what has been happening here within the Kamloops and some of our paths moving forward. I know that, since the announcement of the unmarked graves, there's been so much collaboration, with other First Nation communities, as well as, with some provincial appointments also. We have Charlene Ballou from the First Nations Health Authority, and we also had Lydia Zwinski, who's also been appointed by the provincial government as well to work with First Nations right across BC to, support and what that path looks forward, and also sharing some of the best practices as well. And, sharing of information, and, also sharing it with those conversations that we're having with the various ministers as well as with the federal government. And, I know that, it was publicly stated about the disappointment of, Justin Trudeau not following up with the invitation here, and, his inaction and action of, where he was. I know that my community was truly grateful to have him, we had him for, I think, almost 9 hours that day. And he got to have that opportunity to hear directly from our community survivors here at the Kamloops Secwepemc. He also had the opportunity to, really hear, the traumas that we've experienced, from our survivors, as well as our intergenerational survivors, and to actually firsthand see our residential school and how it is within the heart of our community. And, the importance of, looking at that healing journey that we need to be on together, and that the significance of, September 30th and what that looks like moving forward. And so I know that, I saw it not only as the Kamloops Secwepemc kind of point of view. I ensured that I wanted to make sure that I included our nation. So we had our nation chief here from Secwepemc, and looking at the impact of at any given time, 500 students, children from 500, from other First Nations up to 206 here within BC alone. So knowing that from that, the importance of having a regional chief here, to share from the larger picture. And then September 30th being a national day of acknowledgement and honor, bringing in our national chief, who was also able to be in our community and share. So, I know that those were good steps, moving forward. And those were things that he needed to hear. And, there's some commitments that we have when we look at where we were and what that path looks forward to, that healing journey. So, one of our biggest asks was a healing center, because it's not only going to impact our community, but it's also going to be, for all to be able to access and utilize, because we all have to heal. We all have to make that change for our children and those future generations. So again, thank you very much for having me today. And I hope that I got to share enough information, and I'm thinking I did. There's no questions. So again, thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief Casimir, for all your comments and your thoughts. And I think there has been a few comments and questions that come into the chat in the last little while. So just wanted to share a few of those. One of them is, and I think many people sort of echoed this comment, that they really want to thank you for the way you held Justin Trudeau to account for not showing up on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and your ability to speak truth to power unflinchingly is an inspiration. So I think that's, many people have really echoed that in the chat. And that's not an easy thing to do, to take on the Prime Minister of Canada. So I think many people really respect you for kind of your stance with Justin Trudeau and the government. And there's a number of questions about your trip to Rome, and many people are very interested in hearing about that and potentially the outcome of kind of your meetings with the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Pope. So I didn't know if there's anything more you could share about that, Rosanne.
Sure. I could share that I guess prior to Perry Bellegarde, the national chief, leaving office, he had the conversations and commitment from the Pope for a delegation to go to Rome. Since then, we have our new national chief who has taken over, Rosanne Archibald. And so she continued that path forward. And so on a national perspective, a delegation has been identified. So there was 12, but now there's 13th, and the 13th person is going to be a cultural support worker, to be there for all of us. Because part of the delegation is leadership from across Canada and also youth voices as well, from intergenerational traumas, and being able to share from a youth perspective, what the future could be and how we can, continue on that path. And so we've been meeting quite regularly. BC Regional Chief has asked me if I would consider representing British Columbia, and I said I would do that with honor. And I know that here we want to, carry that voice and that message, the importance of healing and reconciliation, and that moving forward, we know that Catholicism has really been impacted by everyone. And, even questioning their own faith. And we know that, regardless of how you pray or who you pray to, we're all praying to the same creator, the one God. And, we have to reset that path. And it's about acknowledging the truth so we can truly heal moving forward. So those are going to be some of the conversations that will be happening over there. We are working quite closely with the AFN and working on some of the key messaging. And I know that I've been identified as a spokesperson as well to be providing some of the messaging that is going to be taking place over there with the Holy See. And that I'm looking forward to it. And I am looking forward to that. I know growing up myself, I know a lot of the Catholic hymns. I also went to Catholic school myself. So to me, this year really does bring a lot of deep, meaningful conversations that I'm going to be having with him, from that perspective, but also knowing, from, a cultural perspective, from my own, from my own journey within my community, from my parents, from my grandparents, and knowing the impacts that it has had on them, and being able to share some of those traumas moving forward. And even, looking at myself and reflecting how it has impacted myself as well. And the journey that I had to take to, one, forgive those that have impacted, me and those aspects, but being able to gain that strength and courage to, making that difference and, being that hope for our children and our grandchildren. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief Casimir. I think there's a comment I want to share and just another question. Thank you so much from my Indigenous heart for your courage to go and face the Pope and to tell him the truth, and for your grace and courage to invite him to come here. He may not have the courage to do it. He may have the courage to do what's truly right and truly necessary. Lots of comments coming in, just about people so grateful, and all of us at HVBC too, for all the amazing work you're doing to work towards reconciliation, kind of on that more individual level, that more community level, and the more systemic level. And I think there's a number of people who are interested in seeing, where could they find out about all the work that your community is doing? Is there a place they could go to get that information on, kind of all the things that you're doing in your community around the issues you've shared today?
Excellent. Well, all the information could be found on our local Tk'emlúps website. And we do have various links of the information that has been shared. Everything that we've been doing to date has been also posted there. And we also do bi-weekly updates as well. So those get uploaded on our website as well. So we're keeping everyone informed and, apprised of the information that we have and moving forward and what some of those next steps are. I know on a higher level, we also have a locateur that has been appointed from the federal government to be able to work with us, because we know that this also carries legal parameters. And so we know that there's going to be a very long path moving forward, and looking at those legal parameters, you know, how we could be working together and working in those collaborative efforts to be able to, you know, support, you know, what has happened, what has taken place, so that we can get through those steps. Because I know that one of the biggest questions and statements has been, why isn't the site not yellow taped? Why is it not treated like a crime scene? So, you know, for us, the biggest thing is about the love, the honor, respect, and the dignity of knowing that those truths have always been there. And so why hasn't it been dealt with or yellow taped back then? So utilizing and occupying our jurisdictional area when it comes to our direct ancestral lands is that we want to love and honor and respect, and that we do want to work with the higher levels of government to treat this like a crime scene and use science to help us step by step. And so that's kind of the path forward. And we do have all our own laws in place when it comes to archaeological remains, archaeological digs, and you know, those steps are going to be also assisting us with that path forward. And those two can be found on our website as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kúkpi7 Casimir. Really appreciate everything you've shared. And yeah, and I know many of us will be going to see, you know, all the resources you shared and all the amazing work that's happening in your community. And yeah, and again, I don't think I can echo again all the comments that have come in. Just really appreciating you for all the amazing work you and your community have been doing to help kind of Canada be more accountable for its current, present, and past history. So again, thank you to you. Know we're in a virtual room, so normally you'd hear a round of applause, but just really want to thank you again for sharing your thoughts today, Chief Casimir, and we look forward to working with you further.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you again. Take care of yourselves.
So again, we just want to let people know we will have a very short break before our next session starts at 11:15, and we will be having Nancy Poole presenting on lifting each other up, trauma, violence, gender, and substance use. And again, that will be in a different Zoom session. So make sure you click the next join session button before the keynote begins at 11:15. And we look forward to seeing you there shortly. Hope everyone can have a nice couple-minute break.